party over there that ain't no job. It's live, it's all the way live. Don't even have to walk, don't even have to drive. Just slide, slip it, slide. Just forget about the troubles in your 9 to 5 and just sail on. That's what you do, just sail on. Now the dude's so funky, hey, what do you think? What is it called? It's called a Lakeside stank. Come along and ride on a fantastic voyage. I'm the captain of this vessel. We wanna take you on a cruise.
The iconic 1980 Lakeside hit, Fantastic Voyage, invites listeners to leave behind the mundane and embark on a journey filled with unexpected delights. Breaking free of societal constraints and your own comfort zone has compelling rewards, but only if you're ready to embrace the journey. Societal constraints extend to the business world too. Quarterly earnings calls often compel business leaders to follow a path to short-term gains rather than focusing on customer centricity and the long-term gains of that path. Ilenia Vidili's fantastic voyage began on the Italian island of Sardinia and took her to Spain, the United Kingdom, Southeast Asia, and back to Italy. Along that voyage, she learned a lot about customer experience. Recently, she focused her efforts to write Journey to Centricity, a guide for companies willing to embark on a fantastic voyage that focuses on the most important stakeholder in any business, the customer. This week on Next in Queue, we discuss Ilenia's childhood experience growing up in Sardinia, her first experience in customer relationships, why companies still struggle to understand both customers and employees, the relationship between customer centricity and profitability, the power of emotional connection with customers, why there is a trust deficit between customers and companies, the barriers to customer centricity, and a Sardinia-only food you have to hear about. Let's get to it.
Welcome to Next in Queue, the podcast for contact center and customer experience professionals. Next in Queue is brought to you by Happy 2 Vision. Eliminate blind spots and see right through every conversation with Happy 2 Vision. Learn more at happitu.com. Now, here's your host, Rob Dwyer.
Thank you, Ilenia Vidili, for being next in queue. How are you today?
I am great, Rob. Thank you so much for having me today.
So before we really jump into things, this episode is coming out on Thanksgiving here in the U.S. So to all my U.S. listeners, I hope that you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. And Ilenia, I have to thank you for taking the time to be here with me today so that we can talk about all things customer centricity. But before we get to that, I'd like you to tell me a little bit about growing up in Sardinia and how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah, good question. It's something that I've actually never asked. So I was born here in Sardinia and I grew up here until I was 19 years old. I think I was quite fortunate to live here actually, to, have experienced life in an island, in a small island. And I am a countryside girl, so I've basically lived in the countryside until when I left. And I loved it. it was beautiful. I have such a great childhood memories with, here in the countryside and with animals, and just being in true contact with nature. It's so different from other children, like, say, my cousins who used to live in the big cities. And I could see the difference. Even when I was a child, I couldn't really understand why they were living in such ugly places, in the city. So I'd say I feel quite fortunate and grateful to have lived in the countryside when I was a child. Then I left when I was 19, soon after I finished my high school studies. I left to Spain. I was a bit of a rebel when I was a young woman. So I decided to travel. So I started traveling in Europe first, and I left for Spain. Just doing, I've always been in love with languages and traveling in different cultures and meeting new people. And I just felt, since I was a teenager, I felt that Sardinia is a small island compared to other countries, obviously. I felt it was too small for me. But not small in terms of like geographies, but small in terms of isolated from the rest of the world, but also in terms of culture and mentalities. And I just needed to get away. It felt just too narrow, So that's what I did. I left for Spain, and then I stayed there for like a year and a half, 2 years. And I was managing a restaurant for about 2 years, and I loved it there. I learned the language, and it was amazing. It was a really, really beautiful experience. Those experiences that you do when you're just free from worries, just 19, just discovering the world. That you just do anything, because anything else outside of the island to me was new. And then as a countryside girl, obviously, big travels and big cities would scare me, but I wasn't scared at all. I was just really, really excited. Then after Spain, I left. I wanted to study in the UK. I don't know why, but I was drawn by England and studying in the UK. I'd never been there, but I always said, since I was a child, I always said to my mom, I really want to live in the UK. I really want to go there. And my mom used to say, but you've never been there. How, why? Why do you want to live in England? Those things that feels like you've already been there. But no, I had never been there. So, and then one day I decided, that's it, I'm just going to do it. I was 20-something years old, 21, I think, 21 years old. And then I did a one-way ticket, rucksack, and then I left to Cambridge. So left to Cambridge, and I stayed there for 9 years, believe it or not. I was only going there for like a year as just improve my English and just study English. And then I stayed there 9 years. So I joined the university, international business. Then I graduated. Then I started working for big companies like NEC, Bayer, and others. And I always worked in corporate marketing. And that's where my experience in CX started, exactly in NEC, in my first job. And then in 2017, I quit my job, my corporate job, and I went traveling again for 2 years. Actually, it was my sabbatical year, my first year off. I traveled in Southeast Asia. And then the second year, I started my business. So literally, my business started in Singapore, oddly enough. And then I decided to come back to Europe because I thought maybe Asia is too far away from family. So let's grow up a bit. So came back home.
It's it connects with me to hear you say that Sardinia didn't feel big enough for you. You know, I too grew up in a small town, certainly not an island like Sardinia, but a very small community. And I felt the same way when I was in high school. I couldn't wait to get out, and I moved away as quickly as I could. Wanted to live in the big city, and really spent many years in much larger cities. And only recently have I actually come back. I came back home. My wife and I both grew up in this small town, and so we kind of came back home. I don't know if it's a certain point of your life where you're ready for that little bit of peace that's away from the big city, or what the deal is, but it definitely resonates with me a lot. I wonder that growing up in what I would say is a little bit smaller community, right? Different pace of life, and probably, I don't know, did everyone kind of know everyone where you grew up?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Did that?
It's a small town of 1,000 people, so you can.
Yeah. Did that inform your view of customer centricity? Because I know that when you are smaller towns, smaller businesses, you know your customers. I mean, literally know them, know their families, those businesses, some of which have been in business for generations, and they know everyone. Did that help inform your view of what customer centricity should look like?
Yes. And I wrote about it in my book. So my very first experience in customer relationships was when my auntie was a shopkeeper of a newsstand. And in summer times when I was a child, I used to help her out. And I was a very curious child, and I loved serving people, like talking to people and just being around and chatting, basically. So my auntie was the person who taught me the very basic of customer relationships and serving customers. So she knew everybody in the town. So as a newsstand, as you might imagine, people going to church in the mornings, or people taking the children in at school, for example, or just people crossing by, coming back from work, they would stop and get the latest magazine, for example, or the newspaper, and etc. and things like that, or would even just stop to say hi to my auntie and have a little bit of chat. So it was fascinating to me just seeing my auntie being so passionate about serving customers. She used to know everything about her customers, because obviously, I mean, as a small community, you would know the kind of magazine that they'll buy, how much they can spend, and you basically know everything about them. And that's basically what my auntie used to do. She didn't have, at that time, mind you, I was 7 years old, 8, I was quite a child. So it was a long time ago. We're talking about more than 30 years ago now. So she didn't really have any technology. She just had a little notebook, and she used to just put things down about her customers. So say customer A, I don't know, Marie, for example, she used to write things down about them. And she used to remind herself about the customers with this notebook. And it was so fascinating. And then she used to prepare teas and coffees in the morning and biscuits, so that she could, say, elevate the conversations with having a little bit of a chat with coffees and teas. And then if, for example, because our town is in between the countryside and going towards the seaside, basically. So a lot of tourists will pass by and will stop to get a magazine or newspaper. she would always be very kind and, very knowledgeable about giving them information about where to go, for example, and just do the extra mile instead of just selling just a product, in this case, a newspaper. She wouldn't spend much time with these kind of customers, but she was always very helpful and very kind in serving them. So that's where I learned the very basics of customer experience and customer relationships. And my auntie used to always say to me, if you want to do this job, you need to know your customers inside out. You need to know everything about them. And that stuck with me. And that's basically where it started. A lot before than my experiences in NEC.
I love that she had the notebook CRM going way back then. It is technology. Even a notebook, a piece of paper and a pencil can be effective depending on the scale of your customer base. And it sounded like she absolutely employed that the right way so that she could remember really specific things about her customers.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, with your experiences with really large brands now and having worked with brands at scale and knowing that we have technology to get voice of customer data and voice of employee data, why do we still see that companies are not aligned with what customers and employees truly want, particularly with larger companies? Why is that?
Good question. So there is this overload of customer data that companies are so obsessed about. These days, we have all the technology available, as you say. They collect a vast amount of data, but they struggle to analyze, interpret effectively the data, and act upon data. So most of the times, what I see in companies is this first failure. So not collecting the right data that we need. So collecting a lot of data, but not using it correctly and not acting, And a lot of the time we have that data in silos. So we don't actually share it with the rest of the organization so that every department can use it effectively to enhance and improve the customer experience. That's one of the problems. Another problem is that we shouldn't concentrate too much on the data because there is way too much data. So understanding the data, okay, that's fine, but there isn't much understanding of the people, so the consumer behavior. So there is a lot of data around, but we have a lot of data scientists, for example, but we don't have many people who understand people inside organizations. That's another problem that I see. So another problem that we have is not the data itself, is the culture, the customer culture that's missing. And the culture should be the base of the actions that we take, right? So data collection, for example, act upon data, customer data. Okay, before that, do we actually have the customer-centric culture in place? That's another problem that I see. So the culture is the first thing that needs to be set before anything else. And then the last thing I see is an extreme focus on short-term rather than long-term gains. And as we know, customer centricity is more long-term rather than short-term. So there is a prioritization of short-term rather than long-term. So these are the 4 kind of issues that I see that create this misalignment,
Yeah. One of the things that I think you hit on probably more than most people who talk about customer centricity is that short-term versus long-term, and the conflict that comes with public companies who are beholden to shareholders, and shareholders are looking for returns. And far too often, companies act in the interest of those short-term gains, so that at my quarterly review, I can talk about how we, performed year over year, quarter over quarter. But that sometimes comes at the expense of that longer term profitability, that longer term sustainability. Can you talk more about how companies can both be profitable and be customer centric in the long run?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, customer centricity is not the opposite of profitability. And so many companies tend to believe that. We can be customer centric and we can be profitable. It's very functional and it happens quite well. So companies need to be able to align business financial objectives with customer-centric objective. And we need to have this balance because, of course, long-term, standalone like this doesn't work without short-term. So we need to have both, not one or the other. It needs to work in conjunction. Long-term strategy, customer centricity, is more about loyalty and retention, while, for example, other activities like marketing and growth are more about short-term new acquisition of customers and growth of the company, right? And we all know that companies mostly grow with acquisition of new customers. And we need to have a strategy that aligns both. It's not one or the other. That's the thing. I have, for my book, for example, I've interviewed Ili Cafe, the CEO of Ili Cafe, Massimiliano Pogliani. And they are the most ethical company in the world by it's a Bear corporation, and they've been listed as one of the most ethical companies in the world. And they are absolutely super profitable. In fact, they are one of the most successful organizations in the world that sells coffees. And so how can we be profitable and ethical? We are ethical if all our behaviors as a company align with our actions. We cannot be ethical, for example, if we say our products are organic, but then our growers are picking raw materials in really bad conditions. So there is a misalignment, for example. So what they do, they're actually aligned with a creation of shared value strategy, which means that they don't create value only for the shareholders, but for all stakeholders, starting from every practice and every behavior they do, from the growers to the employees inside the organization, to the customers, and then all the internal facilities are all sustainable in order to consume less, for example, and less CO2 emissions. They are trying to be carbon neutral by 2030, and they are succeeding in everything they do. So the philosophy is, the more we take care of our growers, our employees, and our customers, the more they will take care of us. That's the philosophy, that the more we create value for them, the more they will create value for us. So in terms of the growers, for example, what they do, they provide, obviously, as a coffee company, they have coffee growers everywhere in the world, and especially, as it happens, in developing countries. And that means that, for example, for a particular family of growers, they'll take care of them financially, so they pay them well. They have a good contract so that they can have mortgages, they can pay for the children education, they can, and et cetera, et cetera. And we're not talking about extreme, abnormal things, these are just normal things, but that don't happen in many other companies. So they take care of the growers, and the growers stay with the company for the long term. And that means that is a virtuous circle. They've created this virtuous circle that adds value to all stakeholders. By staying with a company for a long term, of course, they will take care of the company. So they pick up the best coffee, they will do everything they can for the company, and the company pays the education to the growers as well. Then in terms of the product is organic. So everything that is at the cultivation of the product, the growing process, everything is made organic, because they believe that customers are looking at sustainability values as well as the taste of the product. And they believe that if the customer values are aligned with the business values, then obviously they will pay more, they will stay more loyal, and they prefer to buy from Millie rather than any other brand. So their philosophy is to create more value for all stakeholders, and not just in short term, but short term and long term. It's a long term strategy. It doesn't happen overnight. And Illy Cafe has been doing the creating shared value strategy for years, for decades, obviously.
I wonder how important telling that story is, in addition to the actual behavior of being customer centric and doing things the right way, because consumers, if they don't necessarily know the story, may become focused on price. I mean, we have all, I think, looked for something that is a little bit less expensive or trying to find that deal. Mm-hmm. So how important is telling your story as a brand when you're doing that to maintaining that kind of success?
It's obviously very important, telling the story. So let me go back a bit. Human beings, as customers, let's say it like that, as customers, we look, of course, at product features and prices and everything that fulfills our really basic needs. So companies believe that customers only look at these convenient sides of a product, so product features, quality, prices, and etc., when they're making decisions. But human beings are influenced by much more than rational factors like price, quality, etc. So price only fulfills our basic needs, right? So that's the rational part of our brain. So the left part of our brains understand processes, logic, numbers, and sciences very easily, and that's what we look for. But unfortunately, it's not just that. The instinctive part of our brain, so the right part of our brain, makes instant decisions, which are based on our emotions, our feelings, our dreams, intuitions, values, beliefs, etc. And both parts of our brain are extremely important. That's how we make decisions. Rational and instinct. Instinctive. Is that how you say in English? I hope so. Let's say emotional part of our brain. So the left part of the brain wants things to be easy to understand, convenient, which is what most companies tend to focus on. But unfortunately, they underestimate how to connect to the right part of our brain, so to the emotional side of the brain. And when customers feel the emotional connection with a brand, they become not just satisfied, which is exactly where companies stop with the product features, prices, etc. But they are emotionally engaged. And emotionally engaged customers they create a long-lasting bond with the brand. This is the difference. And of course, when we have a brand that connects with us on our values and beliefs, we feel like, okay, this brand really gets me. It's not just a price. Yes, the price fulfills my first need, and then the quality, and then the features of the product, and etc. But then, why do I choose it? Because it goes beyond, and it really gets my internal values and beliefs. That's the difference. Of course, it's important to share it, and it's important to communicate it. Unfortunately, what we have these days, we have what we call greenwashing, and that's when companies they say they behave in an ethical way, but they don't actually follow through. It doesn't actually happen, or they use tactics to fool the customer. That's not obviously a customer-centric business as we know it. And I was reading a study the other day, which said that 76% of customers would refuse to purchase a product that they found that it comes from a company that does not support their values and beliefs. For example, if I believe that, okay, that coffee is great, but the people picking the raw ingredients are treated in really bad conditions, I'm definitely not buying it, and that happens especially for newer generations of consumers. And I'm saying millennials and Generation Z, but we shouldn't just stop on generational cohorts, because new generation of consumers are spreading the consumer behavior to other generations as well. So these days, we're not just talking about generation, we're talking about all consumers. Of course, there are consumers who don't care, who don't have those values and those beliefs, but the majority of consumers want to see change in the way that businesses do business.
You are speaking my language. I just had David Allison on the show, whose company Value Graphics provides data on values across the globe and what people value the most. And, what we talked about was how people make, among other things, buying decisions based on how well a brand aligns with their values. And it's not about demographics. It's about how well companies align with our values. And so when you're saying 76% of people are going to make it, I would say the true answer is it's even higher than that. It's a question of what do people actually value. And so, and how well we're telling the story as a brand about what we value and how we present ourselves to the market so that people can understand whether or not they align with us. Certainly, if I value destroying the planet, I'm probably not going to put that in my marketing materials, because then people won't buy from me. But I'm wondering, you mentioned greenwashing, and this brings up trust to me. So how do I, as a company, ensure that I'm viewed as trustworthy?
Good question. Yes. And I like the way you phrased it. How can a company be seen as trustworthy? Yes. Because there is a lot of talks of how can we build trust. And I actually believe that building trust is basically implying that you are in control as a company, but you're not that in control. You need to demonstrate a lot of actions before you build trust. The trust is not just built in 2 days, The short answer is trust. You are a trustworthy company when you keep your promises of consistency and over the long term. It's an ongoing process that requires a lot of consistent effort, action, and dedication. I wrote about in the book, chapter 6, I dedicated a whole chapter on trust because I believe trust is there is a big deficit of trust between consumers, employees, and the wider society. Because, and this is because of the corporate misconduct over many, many years. And again, the short-term extra focus, narrow focus, the maximization of profit at the expense of everything and everybody. And again, consumers and employees and people in general require businesses to do more than just selling products and just exploit resources. So that's the deficit of trust that we are experiencing right now. How do we create this trustworthy brand? It happens in 4 ways, based on my research and on the research of many other colleagues. It happens in 4 ways. So 2 soft traits are integrity and empathy. Integrity, as we know, it refers to the ability to act under moral values and behave under moral values. And that goes, it includes our brand purpose as well, which many companies don't have, they can't really articulate what is their brand purpose. It means being credible through honesty, transparency, and it means conduct business in an ethical and responsible way. So that's our integrity. But we need to show it consistently through our actions every day. Then we have, as we said, empathy, which involves walking in someone's shoes, understanding their emotions, and having that genuine commitment to improving the customer experience. And going back to our voice of the customer, voice of the employees, collecting data, yes, that's amazing, but do we have that genuine commitment to improve the customer experience? ? And then we have last 2 traits, which are hard traits: reliability and competence. Reliability, obviously, is the consistent behavior of delivering the promises made, whether it's product quality or customer experience, customer support, customer service, and the responsiveness of the brand to show up on time and communicate with customers. And that means if I say in my marketing communication, if I say that I will reply to you in 24 hours, as a customer, I expect a response in 24 hours. And if you don't reply in 24 hours, then I'm not sure if I believe you next time, right? So that's something that obviously contributes to becoming a trustworthy company. So that includes reliability, includes responding promptly, for example, to inquiries or to addressing customer issues in a timely way. These little things that don't seem to be so important, but put together everything, all our actions, they obviously create a trustworthy company. Then lastly, we have competence, and involves the skills, the knowledge, and the continuous improvement of a brand to provide those solutions, even products that align to customer needs and goals. So, for example, we have so much customer data. We were talking about customer data earlier. We have so much customer data these days. Do we have, though, a robust cybersecurity strategy and measures in place? And do we clearly communicate the commitment that we have to protect our customer information? That creates trust with customers, So all these things create a trustworthy company. And trust is so important these days, because we don't just differentiate through our products and services, But we are also differentiating through our customer experiences, which obviously are important. But then trust is a soft skill that many companies undervalue, don't take into consideration, as well as empathy. Empathy is another one, because they see it as soft skill. They see it as an intangible thing that doesn't add any value, any profit. See, because they don't see the return of investment. That's the problem. But when customers really trust a brand, they believe that the brand acts in their best interest. That's what we want. That's the bond that we want. You know, I want to go to that company. I want to buy from that company, even though I spend a few dollars more, but because that company gets me. I trust it, and I believe that it acts in my best interest and provide what I expect.
Are we asking the wrong questions or using the wrong measures to understand how customers perceive us?
I don't think it's about metrics. I think it's about perspective. I think companies, they just focus too much on their own perspective, their own internal objectives, their own internal operations, and cutting cost and return of investment and maximizing profit. Those objectives that are not quite aligned to the external perspective of customers. See, there is a clash all the time between companies and customers. Customers expect and want a way of being served or treated, and companies don't understand how and why and which ways to do it. So it's a different perspective, you see. The complexity of an organization also plays a huge role here, because every little department, as you know, we are siloed as organizations, and every department has their own objective, their own perspective, their own role. And that is another problem. So there are lots of problems why a company struggles to become customer-centric, you know. But I think the main problem is the narrative is upside down. Companies are born product-centric, and they continue to be product-centric in the long term. And even though they want to change, they struggle because obviously there is this string of pulling. Oh, I've got to make lots of money, but then customers want this, and then there is this pulling, you know. And it's really difficult to make it happen.
So I want to change gears a little bit here.
Sure.
And this is probably going to feel like a question from left field, and you may have to help me with pronunciation, but can you tell me your thoughts on Kasumarzu cheese? Did I say that correctly?
I'm going, are we talking about cheese now?
Yeah. But this is not a cheese that you can find just anywhere, right? This is a special cheese. Yes.
It's a special cheese that I believe you can find it only in Sardinia. I believe. I might be wrong, but I've only seen it here. And not sure I can explain it properly in English. Basically, I remember my dad used to put it on the table. Oh, let me explain what it is first. So, it just contextualize a bit better. So, it's pecorino cheese that it's basically left inside a bag for months, and it creates mosquitoes inside. Mosquitoes, so the bacterias create mosquitoes, and mosquitoes then, I don't know which way it is actually. So basically, it creates bacteria inside the cheese, and then the bacteria creates worms, And then the worms create cream because they start moving around. Obviously, it's not 2 worms, but it's many of them, like hundreds and hundreds of worms inside this cheese, this like round cheese closed up in a bag. God. And so it creates this. I've never tasted it because, it's not the best kind of cheese to taste. But apparently, it's a little spicy and creamy. So the worms create a cream, a really nice spread that people put on food like bread and everything else. So yeah, back to my dad. When I was a child, my dad was very strict when I was a child. So those kind of those kind of cultures in which you cannot get up unless you finished your food. That sort of mentality. So my dad was quite strict, and I remember that after our meal, he used to unveil this bag of cheese and put this bag on the table, open it up, and obviously there was this pecorino cheese inside. Open up on top, uncovered, and inside the pecorino there was a huge, mass of worms and cream, and I don't know, like a whole population of of worms. Anyway, I'm not sure I'm explaining it, but this is how it was, and I've always refused to eat it. I remember.
Okay.
I remember crying when I was a child, refusing to eat it.
I can imagine. I can absolutely imagine that. It seems like something that is very culturally distinct, and certainly something that, look, if it's still around, there are people who must swear by it and keep making this cheese.
Around, yes.
So there must be something there. I am not going to try it. I'm not that adventurous. It's just not going to happen.
You might like it.
I mean, you might like it too, and you had it right there on the dinner table and you refused. So I don't know. I don't know how I can be expected to try it.
I've never tried it, and I'm perfectly happy.
Now that I've brought back potentially scarring memories from your childhood, I'm sorry about that. Do you have any final thoughts that you wanted to share with the audience that were related to customers and companies and not pecorino cheese with worms in it?
I think the takeaway out of this chat, which is actually the main message of my book, it can be summarized in one word: change. Because businesses have been operating in the same way for way too long, for centuries. And now customers and employees want to see change in the way that businesses do business. They want to see companies that care more about their stakeholders, the internal and external stakeholders, but also about society. And when we talked about the deficit of trust, lack of trust, it is especially towards governments and the politicians. There is also, there is less deficit on companies. And customers believe that companies can actually change things, they can contribute to create a better society. So I believe that if we listen to our customers and we act in a better way, we can create a better business world.
I love that. I love that. Everyone should check out your book, Journey to Centricity. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that? Because you also do keynote speaking, and if I'm not mistaken, in at least 3 languages. So you're certainly not limited to English. You've got Spanish and Italian. So all kinds of options when it comes to language. How can people get in touch with you?
So I'm quite active on LinkedIn. I create content frequently on LinkedIn. And if anybody wants to follow me or get in touch with me, I believe LinkedIn is the best way, Ilenia Vidili, or via my website, ileniavidili.com. Or even Instagram, just looking for my name and I pop up.
Well, Ilenia, thank you so much for joining me for this Thanksgiving episode. I'm glad that we could talk about a special food from your home, even if I've scarred you and now probably the audience. So thank you so much for being next in queue.
Thank you very much, Rob, and thank you everybody for listening. Thank you.
Next in Queue is brought to you by Happy To and is produced by me, Rob Dwyer. If you enjoy this podcast, please by all means subscribe and or rate this podcast in iTunes or your favorite podcast app. But more importantly, please tell just one person about this podcast. Word of mouth is the best way for people to discover new content. As always, thanks for listening.